Okay, welcome, ladies. We're so happy to see you. Welcome to the April Urban Devi Sangha and Women's Discussion Group. A special welcome to those joining us for the first time. If you are joining us for the first time, please write it in the chat so that we can all say hello. I promise that this is a very welcoming and friendly group. My name is Damodar Priya Devi Dasi, and I co-host this monthly gathering with our dear Rukmini Walker and Surabhi Govinda Devi Dasi. And our dear Rukmini Walker can't join us today. However, she's here in spirit as always, right? Because when we're all gathered together, helping each other out, she's here. So let me introduce our guest speaker for today. So Vrndavan Vinodini Devi Dasi is, or also known as Vrin, is a leadership and mindfulness coach who specializes in helping individuals, groups, and teams to decrease their emotional and mental reactivity. She uses the framework of Enneagram, yoga psychology, and meditation practices to help others solve the question, why do I get in my own way? Such a great question, right? So alongside coaching, she shares the Gita, she leads kirtan, and offers meditation in yoga studios online and in person. So as we know, today's topic is why do I react the way I do? And a little bit about that topic before we bring it over to Vrin. Often our reactive patterns like snapping at others, shutting down, getting impatient, etc., get the better of us. It's a common to feel helpless and think, I have no idea how to stop this. So today, thanks to Vrin, we're going to explore what causes us to exhibit these reactive patterns, why we continue to engage in these patterns, and some action items in terms of like what we could do about it. So it's going to be really interactive. She has a great presentation, ladies. I'm super excited for everyone to participate. So the floor is yours, Vrin. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Damodar, and thank you all for being here today. It's an honor, it's a gift to be with you all, and special thanks to Rukmini, to Damodar, and to Surabhi Kunj and the whole Urban Devi team for having me. This is such a beautiful offering to bring together all of us, who are in these female bodies to come together and to learn from one another and to grow together and to really evolve our consciousness and learn more about Bhakti. So Damodar already kind of introduced me, so maybe I'll just speak a little bit about my own path of how I came to Bhakti. And so I was born into this beautiful culture, and around the age of, I think it's, wow, I'm dating myself now, like 22, 23, really took to the path of bhakti myself. And how that happened was I was really wanting to do something after my biochem degree. So what I do now is very different than what I used to do. And between my bachelor's and my master's, and thought maybe I'll go backpacking across Australia. And I have pretty conservative Indian parents. And my mom was like, oh my God, no way. We will never find you again. And so my dad played intermediary, and he said, why don't you go to this beautiful Bhakti community known in Belgium known as Radhadesh, and you can learn more about the Gita and yoga psychology and all of this that you've been brought up with. And I said, never. And I'm not sure if you've ever had this experience, but it's almost as though everything around you conspires against you to be like, really? You said never? Just watch me. And I can't tell you how or why, it's inexplainable, but I had a change of heart. And so 5 weeks before the course was about to start, I said, tail between my legs, went to my dad and said, so can you get me to Belgium? And it was there that I really discovered how this path of bhakti is not just something that is, quote, Indian or stemming from the Indian subcontinent, but rather it is this non-sectarian way of really being able to awaken our true selves and connect ourselves to divinity, to our source. And that was really where I had the opportunity to choose this bhakti path for myself. And so fast forward a whole bunch of years, and I met my husband, and that is where I came across the framework of the Enneagram. And I found that the combination of the Enneagram yoga psychology, the Gita in particular, and meditation practices to be so powerful and so useful. And that, along with the fact that I've struggled with my own reactivity for so many years, is my focus today, and something that I hope I can share with you whatever I've learned so far and ongoing journey with that. So a little bit of what to expect today, just to set a little bit of context. So first of all, we'll explore what is reactivity. As you've probably experienced, all of us may have an idea of what a word means, but it's nice to have a common definition. So that way we're all on the same page and it's really clear. So we'll talk about what reactivity is. I'll offer a perspective in which we can approach it and understand it better. Then we'll go into really the substance of the why, because as mentioned in that little blurb, I'm not sure about any of you, but I feel really helpless. When I'm in my reactive patterns, it feels as though, what am I doing? Why again? Like, I should know better. And to really be able to understand the why helps us to do two things. And that is, it blends together self-compassion, empathy, along with responsibility. And what I've personally noticed is I tend to pendulum swing in between both directions, right? And that is, I can be really empathetic and self-compassionate and be like, don't worry about it. It's okay. You know, they're there, and nothing changes. Or else I go to a place of like beating myself up. Like, how could you do this again? You should know better. Like, you really have to make changes. And coming from that place of almost lack um, or self guilt doesn't really inspire any change either. And so being able to hold both, and they do feel like opposites several times. How do I be serious and take responsibility, and how do I offer grace to myself, are the two pieces that are really necessary in any type of sustaining transformative work, and is also necessary for us to understand, and helps us understand why we react. And then finally, we will discuss how the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, can help us in building the capacity to become less reactive. And so that'll be kind of our journey for today. And with that, we'll dive right into it. And a quick note, if you have any questions, we will have time at the end for that. But please, I really highly encourage you to write it down. We wouldn't want any of you to lose those, because they're so powerful. It's in questioning and answering that we are really able to churn anything and go more deeply into it. So what is reactivity? Before we go into that, I'll say I'd love to paint my vision of how I would show up in any and all of my interactions. And it is this: I encounter a stimulus, right? And that stimulus could be environmental, it could be another person, it could be thoughts in my mind, whatever it is. And then with so much intentionality and groundedness and objectivity, I'm able to respond, right? And this sounds fantastic. And in the few times I've been able to do this, it has also felt really liberating, because I'm not at the beck and call of whatever is intensely pushing me to behave in a particular type of way. So this is really, we could say, this is the vision or the goal of what I personally want to be able to show, how I'd like to show up as, and perhaps this might be for you as well. But instead, this is typically what happens. There's a stimulus, and then there's a reaction, right? And this part here in the middle, this is being generous. And I'm speaking about myself. This is really, truly being generous. There isn't even that much space between stimulus and response for myself. Typically, it's stimulus and it's response. It's just so quick, back to back. In fact, it's so unconscious what is taking place within me, right? That there is no place to really, truly process or see. why? What is happening? Like, what is prompting all of this churning and intensity within, right? And one word in my studies and readings I've come across that I found to be really helpful in defining reactions is that reactions can be thought of as reflexes, right? It's reflexive. This is an automatic thing that just happens to me. I'm not even conscious of it. It bypasses the conscious mind. And because of that, all of a sudden, I've shown up in a particular type of way, and I'm even surprised that this is what's taken place, right? And so when we really break it down then, right, there are different components to reactivity that together is making up this theme or this this word, and that is there's the stimulus, whatever is causing whatever my senses are able to perceive, and that is now being entering in and consumed internally. Then there is this piece of some type of processing that is often so unconscious and so quick that I'm not even aware of it. And then afterwards, there's this byproduct of that processing, and that is the reaction piece, right? So we can think of it in that way: stimulus, the middle, and then the reaction. And first and foremost, I'd like to say one thing here. All reactions aren't bad. Right? It's so easy. Again, the mind is so quick to, it lives in duality, you know, that's its function: good, bad, happy, sad, black, white, success, failure, right? All reactivity isn't bad. And we hear many examples of this. For example, if there was a mosquito flying into this room now, or a fly, and, you know, a reflex, a reaction would be for my hand to just swat it away from my face, right? And that is protective and it's helpful. And I may not even realize that my hand has moved. And so in that way, a reaction can be helpful. The same thing, we hear about people having a reaction where they've just slammed on the brakes all of a sudden when they've been driving. And then a moment later, a car has run through a traffic light. And if they hadn't slammed on the brakes, they would have been in a really precarious situation. So when we're talking about reactivity, we're talking about working on those pieces which no longer serve us, right? We're not talking about reactivity as bad, good. It's the fact that we have these often unconscious patterns that manifest, and taking a good hard look at them to see, is this serving me, and ultimately serving others as well? And that is what I'd like for us to think about, like, and hold the container when we're talking about reactivity today: that which does not serve me. So then, moving on to kind of really exploring that first piece of stimulus, right? That's where we start. That's where kind of the train of reactivity like takes off when we encounter a stimulus. So what happens? We perceive something, and that perception then often provokes an emotional response within us, right? And those emotions can very often feel intense. We may not even recognize the intensity, but there is a surge of emotions. And those feelings are now going to transform and bring up narratives, thoughts, right? And those thoughts are now starting to churn within. And I want to say here that sometimes it starts off with the mental piece, right? I perceive something, and then narratives and stories start to come out, and that in turn brings forth emotions and feelings. So this really is interchangeable, right? Emotional, mental, mental, emotional. But what ends up happening is that there's almost like a feedback loop that's formed here, right? That I feel something that brings up a narrative, and often it's a narratives that are based on past experiences, right? And then this kind of cycles and continues, and that finally leads to behavior, right? That which we experience and see externally. And so if we kind of think about it, then stimulus to reaction is really, stimulus is the external, then the space in between is the internal, and then the reaction is the external. And of course, reactions can also be internal, but we're talking here about those that we perceive of ourselves and others. But definitely, reactions internally can be emotional states that we end up maintaining, and that we are trying to suppress or trying to figure out. And similarly with the mental narratives and thoughts, right? So altogether, this is what reactivity is about, right? We're having this, we're experiencing the stimuli, we're experiencing feelings and narratives and thoughts and all of that, and that pushes out and often leads to some type of external behavior. So having now kind of offered and having a better understanding of what reactivity means, let's move to the why. Like, why is this happening to me? Why am I reacting, right? So I'd like to offer a framework, and this is by no means comprehensive, but something that I hope that you can take away from today and at least have a starting place by which, if this is something of interest to you, you can explore for yourself, right? And so what I'm going to be offering is like a 3-stage kind of framework of reactivity. And so for the first stage, reactivity happens in relation to our basic needs. And when I'm talking about basic needs, I'm talking about eating, drinking, and sleeping. Now, I'm not sure about any of you, but I'm kind of terrible with all of that. It's just like this life and the time we're living in, we're just bombarded by so much all the time, right? Like our phones are pinging and there are so many emails to respond to and responsibilities and all of it that it can feel difficult to actually just maintain and even recognize I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, or I'm tired. And I want to break up like sleep in terms of like exhaustion as an emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical, like all 4, right? Like all of those things. We often think about it solely on the physical platform, but like all of these are really there, right? Now, of course, there may be other basic needs in terms of like clothing and shelter and such, but for the sake of simplicity, let's focus on these 3, right? Like eating, drinking, liquids, that which really helps us. Our bodies are like, 70% made of water, and then sleeping or resting. And so when we think about stage 1 reactivity, and I see this with my kids all the time, when they are when they're already in like tantrum mode or they're starting to get grouchy, the first thing I've started to recognize is, have they slept enough? Have they eaten enough? Or do they need something to drink? And very often, if I can catch this before a certain threshold, we have all been saved. And if not, well, the train has left the station and we are going to suffer, the results of our karma, which in this case is that we didn't satisfy basic needs. Really, that's what's happened. So when I think about myself, at least, I realize, and for most of us, I think we're just kids in bigger bodies. That's it, right? So we also have these needs, and perhaps there's a way in which we've built capacity over time as we've gotten older to hold these needs and to delay fulfilling them. But I think we've reached a threshold now of the delay is so long that it's actually affecting our awareness, right? And this is going to be a big piece we're going to be talking about in terms of reactivity, right? That when these basic needs aren't met, our ability to hold what is coming at us immediately decreases. Immediately. And so if you are noticing that you're exhibiting patterns of reactivity, and these may not be big things. It could be, but often it's like, I'm edgy, I'm snapping, I'm extremely quiet, I'm complaining, I'm, like any of these kinds of like little things. It's a really good idea to kind of just take a look and see, like, do I need a nap? Like maybe that could be helpful. Or do I need something to really nourish me, or something to just drink some water? I mean, the statistics are clear. Often we're not even hungry, we're thirsty, right? And that if we actually feel thirsty, I'm sure all of us have know that like it's a sign it's too late, actually, right? That the experience of thirst means like you've gone too far. So stage one, reactivity in relationship to our basic needs. And the first place to look at in terms of why we react, it's because on a fundamental survival level, I have not fulfilled what is needed for this body and mind, which although as I'm sure in various sessions of Urban Devi, it's already been explored, it is not who we are, but something that we, an important gift and element that we need to live in this world. It's also important to take care of it properly, right? And so this body and mind, it requires these three things at minimum in order to function properly. And if that's not there, we will react. So stage two, reactivity now, is in relationship to our core needs and fears. And specifically these needs and fears that are related to our identity. Now, this is one place, unfortunately, we don't have time to really delve into the Enneagram today, but where I found the Enneagram to be extremely, extremely powerful and helpful, because there's a way in which it articulates how, although we have numerous needs, and all of us have needs, there are certain drivers, very specific drivers that we are uniquely wired with. And that's what makes each of us different. And when we are in touch with what is it that drives me, then there's a way in which the mystery of why am I reacting in this way starts to become solved. So, for example, common needs that we all have: to feel loved, to feel worthy, to feel alive, to feel peaceful, needs for security, all of these are common needs, but there may be one that really drives the show. And with that, if I'm able to really tap into it and really start to explore, start to see how that core need drives almost everything that I do. Almost everything that I do. And, this, I noticed this in my own life, for years. It's very embarrassing to admit. I have been very guilty of interrupting, in conversations, right? Interrupting. And so well-wishers have offered that feedback to me. And, over time, I've started to notice it for myself. And if I really, really look deeper beneath the surface of why am I interrupting it, what I've come to realize is that it's around this core need that I have of feeling valuable. And that in a conversation, if I'm not able to speak and feel like I'm not contributing, then I have an experience that I'm not valuable. And so what am I trying to do? I'm trying now to find a way to feel valuable. Now, the thing is that it often backfires. And that's what reactivity typically does when it's not serving us. What we're trying to receive or we're trying to get is what we're almost expressing through our reactivity. But often we end up experiencing the exact opposite, and our fears end up being realized, right? So with interrupting, I've probably derailed conversations, or someone's train of thought has been lost, and they're feeling frustrated. The last thing that they're doing is thinking like, yeah, great, great contribution, thanks so much for interrupting, right? Like that's not what's taking place. And so when we're talking about the stage two reactivity, it's really around identity, right? We're all looking to have our our vision of how we want to appear to be validated. And when we don't experience that validation, that may come out in the form of reactivity. And this can be anywhere from like these micro reactivity pieces, right, to like medium type reactivity, right, depending on the situation and what's at stake. And then finally, we move to stage 3 reactivity. And this is the accumulation of not getting our core needs met, those needs we were talking about in stage 2. And so over and over and over. So like there are numerous examples of people being passed over for promotions, like their value has not been met, or their loyalty to a company has not been recognized, or, their ability to really create connections and help others has not been recognized. And in that being ignored or neglected over and over and over and over again, then this is often where you kind of see a more explosive type of reactivity, right? It's a bit more extreme. So we may think of like yelling. Yes, that might be one form. But, in the example I offered, that could even mean I quit, I'm done, I'm out, forget it. No more, I'm not putting up with this anymore, right? And so these are different ways in which stage 3 reactivity can come about. So here we go. And once again, the framework of stage 1 reactivity is related to self-preservation, literally of the body and mind. Stage 2 is in relationship to identity, right? These core needs and fears. And stage 3 is when those identity pieces have continually been left unvalidated for long amounts of time, and it just becomes unbearable. So that is why we react. Ultimately, if we boil it down to one word, it's around needs. We react because we have needs, and often we're not experiencing the fulfillment of those needs. That's it. And for today, what we're focusing on really is that stage 2 reactivity, right? Around identity, core needs, core fears. And so here I brought up the word awareness a little while ago, and I think this is also just so important. And we can think about our awareness as something that is constantly fluctuating, right? Because when we are aware, it is much likely that we won't react, because we actually have that sense of awareness. And so this is an example given with respect to levels of consciousness from the Enneagram, actually, and I found to be very fitting here, and so I'm putting it in. So if we think about our consciousness or our awareness as a funnel, at the very top of the funnel, we can see it is wide, right? It is expansive, it's spacious, right? And when our awareness is at that state, we're in a healthy state of consciousness, right? We're able to kind of see things objectively. We can relate this to the Gita and to the Yoga Sutras that speak about these 3 modes of nature, right? Or 3 energies, right? And we're talking here about the energy or the mode of goodness, which in Sanskrit is known as sattva guna, right? And goodness is characterized by illumination, by peace, by clarity, by groundedness, by intentionality, right? So all of that, when we're able to tap into that, right, then I'm able to see more clearly, right? I'm able to notice my patterns. I'm able to kind of see, oh, this might be a story, like, oh, I remember you feeling, you always come up when something like this happens, right? So that is the high, healthy level of awareness, which we all aspire towards, right? And so that is at the very top. Now, of course, there are numerous levels in between, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll break this up into 3. And so then in the middle, right, we notice the funnel is now starting to constrict, right? It's starting to get narrower. And this is really kind of the average level of awareness or consciousness. We can talk about this in terms of controlling. And this is really where like reactivity comes up, right? Because if we think about reactions are actually another way of trying to assume control, right? That I've experienced something, this is my kind of conclusion as to what it means, right? And because of that, it affects me in a particular type of way, and I'm going to try to control this situation. So this happened to me 2 weeks ago. It's just so bad. Anyways, my eldest daughter is 4.5. I'm really trying to work on reactivity, and it's amazing how it ebbs and flows. And that's what happens with even our consciousness throughout the day, right? It ebbs and flows. Like 1 minute we're really aware, another minute we're more average, and then we'll see like it starts to go dip down even further. And so we're fluctuating constantly. And so my daughter was, she finished taking her shower, and, she was in a bit of a grouchy mood. She hadn't slept enough. So there you go. Stage 1 reactivity, already in full swing, hasn't slept enough. Okay, aware of that. I am aware that she hasn't slept enough. Got it. Okay. So inside, I'm like, this, come on. Okay, remember this. And so I came to her, brought her clothes, whatever, and she really loves pink. And so I brought her pink underwear, and she was like, not that pink. I just like, okay, an opportunity to not react. It's not a big deal. It's okay. We'll discuss tone later on, because she's not going to hear me if I try to explain the concept of tone right now. It was rude. That wasn't okay. File that away. Okay, went back and got her another pair of underwear, another pink, which I thought, really, like, she'll like this pink. It's one of her, not that one either. And all of my like awareness of like, this is not a big deal, don't react, just flew out the window. It just flew out. And I was like, what is happening? This is not a big deal. And immediately, from some semblance of a higher level of consciousness, immediately went into controlling, right? Because there was a need to kind of control the situation. And if I look more deeply to like the need, stage 2 reactivity around the need of, even my own identity, what was happening for me is that this is a waste of time, was what was going through my consciousness. This is a waste of time. I do not want to be stuck in this situation of something so inconsequential, at least to me, of like something nobody will even see you wear. Like, come on, get over it, right? But this is what happens. This is what we try to do when we're controlling, right? We're trying to take hold of a situation. And it's amazing when on one hand, we hear about like planning, which can be sometimes likened to control, is important, but at the same time, we need to loosely hold it, right? It's such a balance. Like life is it's so much about balance. Like, how do I hold this loosely and really objectively kind of see beyond and notice if this is truly something so important or not, right? So this is personal example of how it's very easy to fall into the controlling levels of consciousness. Yes. And then finally, we move down to a stage, when it becomes, you can also think of this as the direction of stress, right? And this was really what was happening to me. I was getting more and more stressed, right? From aware, I get stressed, I move into the average. And then if I'm extremely stressed, I start moving into a state of like unawareness, really. And this is extremely destructive. Destructive not only towards ourselves, but also destructive in terms of how it affects others and our environment. So why is this important? This is a place, I think, that we can really kind of like hook ourselves onto and just kind of take a look at, even when you wake up in the morning, I would offer to you, just have a quick glance to kind of see, a quick check-in to see, okay, how am I feeling in terms of rest? Okay, I'm going to have breakfast. Great. It's on my plan. I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to fulfill these 2 other basic needs. Or if you're not a breakfast person, that's great, but you're going to fulfill that need later on. And yeah, how am I feeling? Like, am I feeling like, yeah, I have some openness in me, or am I already feeling constricted? Because that check-in, and we can think of this as becoming aware of our own level of awareness. This is getting a bit meta, right? But like I'm becoming aware of my own level of awareness, right? And when I'm able to do that, it just gives me a platform to stand on, that when something comes at me, I'm already conscious that perhaps I'm not in a fully open state as I'd like to be, or perhaps I'm a bit closed. Okay, that's really good to know, because if I'm conscious of that, how I internalize things, there's a different way in which perhaps I can approach it, right? So trying to become more aware of my own level of awareness. And as we've been discussing here, we're kind of talking about like this middle stage, right? I mean, we can be extremely aware, we can be extremely destructive, but most of us, most of the time, are kind of in this in-between stage here, right? And similarly, right, I spoke about how this isn't constant, right? And the yoga texts speak about this too, that these modes, right? We talked about goodness as being extremely aware. It's the average or controlling level is known as passion or rajas in Sanskrit. And passion is characterized by a lot of desires, work, intensity, and this type of forcefulness, actually. And then finally, when we move to the last stage, this is known as tamas or ignorance. This is really a state of like a lot of apathy, inertia. There's like a disinclination to doing anything productive, right? So we can also think of this in terms of our own levels of consciousness. So now, with all of that, we've kind of explored, what is reactivity? Why do we become reactive? Again, that's because we have needs. And so now, what can we do about this? And how can the Gita help, right? And so there has been one verse in the Gita that I have always appreciated for many, many years. And it's only in the past few years, somehow I felt like, wow, I guess there was an attraction to this unknowingly, because this really is such a powerful verse to help us combat reactivity. And so this is verse 2:14, chapter 2, chapter 14 of the Gita. And if you'd like, I'll invite you to just sit back, close your eyes, take a deep breath in. I'll repeat this, or I'll sing this 3 times in Sanskrit. There's something very powerful about sound vibration. What to speak of sound vibration that has been uttered by divinity. And so you can just take this in. We will explore the English in just a minute, but you can go ahead, sit up straight, and then just, shake out your shoulders if you need to. Close your eyes. Let's take in a deep inhale here. Exhale, feeling the ground or the seat underneath you, supporting you. And just taking in some deep inhales and exhales here, and you can just take in the sound vibration of what Krishna is speaking to Arjuna here in the Gita. Matra sparshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkadha agamapayino nityas tam stitikshasva bharata. Matra sparshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkadha agamapayino nityas tam stitikshasva bharata. Matra sparshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkadha agamapayino nityas tam stitikshasva bharata. Taking in a deep inhale, exhaling, opening the eyes. So what is it that Krishna is saying here to Arjuna? And so he says, O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of the winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharat, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So this is such a beautiful analogy that Krishna gives. And as you may have noticed, I've highlighted 3 specific words or phrases here that I want to just explore a little bit more in terms of what we've been talking about in terms of reactivity. So the first one is non-permanence, right? And here what Krishna is saying is happiness and distress. And he's using happiness and distress as an example. But when we talk about the mind, it's all about duality. So happiness and distress, success or failure, aversion, attachment, good, bad, all of that, right? Are what? Their appearance and disappearance are continuously happening. They are non-permanent, right? So if we think about bringing this back to our reactivity, when that internal churning is happening of, we experience something and we're feeling all the feels and all of these narratives are going through our head. I know for myself that if, by a miracle, I'm able to actually slow that down, what happens is it feels as though this will never end, right? There is an experience that this is permanent, that I'm not going to be able to get out of this. And, this pain that I'm experiencing, it's just too much for me, right? And so what Krishna is saying here, the non-permanence, in some ways is our prep work, right? To be able to hear more and more about this, right? And to discuss this, that happiness and distress really is non-permanent, to explore this for ourselves, to witness it, right? And to note this down when this happens to us, right? Oh, wow, I just got a promotion at work. Awesome. I feel so happy. And then just kind of noticing, okay, great. I'm experiencing a sense of happiness right now. And then to notice, oh, like that happiness is starting to dwindle, like noticing that. And then, oh, again, I'm experiencing, they're known as waves, right? That's how the Gita describes them. They're waves of happiness and distress. And if we're able to spend some time and really do this prep work well, what happens is now we're starting to build capacity, right? If we want to do anything, like if we want to become, a doctor, there's a ton of prep work that needs to be done, right? Like you need to go, you need to do all of your earlier education, and then afterwards, you go for your bachelor's. Oftentimes now they want you to at least have a minimum of a bachelor's, and then you go to med school. Like there's a ton of prep work. So to think of reactivity as, something that like I'll just be able to figure this out really quickly is, unless perhaps we've been gifted with that realization and we're coming into this life with it, it requires us to do that initial work. And it really is this, to realize, not just know theoretically, but to realize that and to have that lived experience of, yes, happiness and distress are non-permanent. I'm not going to get tricked up by this anymore. And once we are able to do that, then Krishna offers us a focus. And he says, where does this experience and happiness come from? It comes from sense perception, right? So when we're talking about stimulus, the space in between, and then reaction, the stimulus is the sense perception, right? Our 5 senses are constantly looking to engage with, entangle with their objects, right? So the eyes want to see things, the mouth wants to vibrate things, or the tongue wants to vibrate or ingest things. Our hands want to touch things, our ears want to hear things, and so on. So all of that is coming into us, and we are being assaulted by a lot of sense perception, right? And that sense perception goes in And it goes to where? It goes into the processing center of the mind. And the mind is responsible for sorting, right? It sorts out this good, bad, happy, sad, all of this, right? But when we are actually able to recognize my experience of happiness and distress, in many ways has nothing to do with the heart, which sometimes it's easy to get confused with. It has to do with my senses. And guess what? My senses are, well, you can see I wear glasses. So they're definitely not perfect. They're imperfect. And so because of that, the other thing I often think of is if you go to a restaurant with somebody, right, and you both order the same dish, right, you might have completely different experiences of that dish, right? I may have it and be like, this is overly salted. Like, this is terrible. I cannot eat this. And my friend is going like, this is the best thing I've ever had, right? And you see even from there that the experience of happiness and distress, I'm in distress. I don't want to pay money for this. This was terrible. And my friend is like, I can't wait to make my next reservation. This was fantastic, happy. So recognizing that this sense perception is imperfect. And now the state of my consciousness of happiness and distress is based on something imperfect. We have a place to focus. And that's what Krishna is saying, that just notice how often you experience happiness and distress because of information that has come through your senses. And then finally, and this is really like the pièce de résistance that Krishna offers, is he says, one must learn to tolerate what the senses have perceived without being disturbed. And so now this is like, we're really focusing on capacity building, right? Really, really focusing on it. And so if we think about stimulus and reaction, right? The reason here in the middle, this space is so small, is because our ability to tolerate our own suffering is so low, right? Because when that stimulus that our senses perceive comes in, however the mind categorizes it, often we experience that as some type of suffering. And that suffering is exactly what Krishna is saying in the verse we were just looking at, as what we need to learn to tolerate. When we're able to tolerate, that is where our power lies. Great philosopher Viktor Frankl, I believe philosopher, speaks about how it's between stimulus and response that lies our greatest freedom, right? And that greatest freedom comes when we're able to tolerate. Now, toleration or tolerance has mixed emotions amongst many of us. This is not a straightforward word. Very often we've heard about it in terms of our material experiences, like, I just keep tolerating and tolerating and tolerate something that I don't like, right? That it can actually cause me even greater suffering. In fact, I shouldn't have been tolerating. I should have removed myself from that situation. That's not the type of tolerance that Krishna is speaking about here. He's saying tolerate. And in terms of this work, in terms of reactivity, we're talking about toleration in terms of being able to elongate that space between stimulus and reaction. When we're able to widen that gap, widen that space, that requires me to tolerate my own suffering. Then in that time, in that space, right, what happens is I'm able to become more objective, right? We may have heard of, often people say that if you're angry with somebody, write them a letter, don't hold anything back, don't send it for 72 hours, right? It's almost as though, you need to get whatever you need to get out. But when you come back after 72 hours and you look at it, you have space, you've given yourself space, you've given yourself time, you're able to hopefully look at it with more objectivity. Because now there's a way in which that distance and that time can offer insights. insights. Perhaps there are things that you have missed. Perhaps there's a way in which to communicate that would be much more effective. Right. So that is what we speak about in terms of tolerance. It's not just keeping myself in situations that are unhealthy, right? That is definitely not what Krishna is propounding here, but rather it's to just really like see things more clearly. It's to ultimately raise ourselves up in terms of, you know, the levels of awareness to a more healthy state, to that state of goodness, right? And so when we think about moving from reactive to responsive, then, you know, so this may be where I currently am now, right? That most things make me extremely reactive. There's not much space in between, but to actually start to move to a place where there's stimulus, there's actually an opportunity for pausing, and then from that place to actually respond. Okay, so with that, I'll hand it over to Damodar Priya to move us into the next part of our time together.
Thank you so much, Vrin. I usually our chat is blowing up, but I think everybody was so busy taking notes that they couldn't even. So if you could move it to the next slide that has the thing for the breakout groups, that would be great.
Definitely.
So everyone, we're going to be moving into breakout rooms in a couple of minutes. Could you please take a screenshot of this in case you're not in our WhatsApp groups? Just because this is the best way while you're in the breakout rooms to remember what we're going to be doing. So please take a screenshot, or if you're in our WhatsApp groups, we'll be sharing it there. So I'm going to pause the record going. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. We're in our Q&A and reflection section, and this is where we'd love to hear from all of you. So please feel free to either raise your virtual hand, or you can also unmute yourself if you have a question for the speaker, or if you have a reflection from your time together that you want to share. And I see that Lee already has her hand up. Please, Lee, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Hare Krishna. I didn't get permission, so I'm just going to say one of our participants in our breakout room brought up a good point of when we were discussing our basic needs of eat, drink, and sleep, that it's the quality also that we need to worry about, because she was discussing the quality of her sleep is not what she would like. So that really resonated with me, because even if we get 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep, if it's really lousy, then it doesn't matter. So I wanted to share that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Yes. And thank you to the participant who brought that up. I wanted to bring that up myself, and it slipped my consciousness. It's true. In fact, perhaps many of you are familiar with this practice of yoga nidra, but yoga nidra is a practice, for those who may not be aware, of psychic sleep. And it's said that one of the things that yoga nidra does, you lie down, close your eyes, it's guided, you're listening to somebody take you through this process. What it offers is that it takes you into this place of the beta state. And it's so important because typically we only access that state as we fall into deep sleep for about 5 seconds. But it's in this state that you actually experience active healing. And so yoga nidra is said to heal not just on the physical level, but also on the emotional and mental levels. And also it is said that, what is it? I'm trying to remember now, that 1 hour of yoga nidra is worth 4 hours of regular sleep. And the reason for that is because, as you were mentioning, Lee, and the other person who brought up this important piece around quality, that it's the quality of the rest that is so important. We may be physically exhausted and we go and we like just, collapse, and we wake up the next morning, but the mind is still going, right? We have the mind, we have emotions, we have all of these still churning. And if that churning is still taking place on those levels, we have never actually been able to rest. Right. So such an important point. Thank you for raising that.
Thank you so much, Vrin and Lee. Does anybody else have any realizations or questions that they'd like to share? And while we're waiting for people to get their courage up, I just wanted to share, I had put it in the chat that a lot of what you were sharing in the beginning also reminded me of when I was working with my therapist. She would always tell me, remember HALT, HALT, and it was an acronym for me to like check in and be like, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Or am I tired? To just kind of do that self check-in. So I really appreciated how you're kind of connecting all these things together. Oh, and we have Martine with her hand up. Please, Martine, go ahead.
Very well, everyone. Yes, couple of things. I think also for myself, I mean, that subject resonates a lot because it's part of my makeup, if you will. And for me, sometimes it's easy to identify in somebody else, their basic needs. Like I was saying in our breakout room, my husband, when he gets cranky, I know he hasn't had enough to eat, right? He needs to eat. So, and he's a 6'2" man, he has a big presence, so everything that goes with that, I love him to death, but I also mentioned, I think, so for me, it's true. And we are caught in that wheel that through the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, we try to kind of find our space and slow everything down. But also, I was reflecting on also what reactivity patterns we inherit from our family, our parents. And as I said, it's not a criticism, right? It's just part of their story that we inherit, their family dynamics, the historical time. My parents lived during World War II. We are Jewish, so everything that goes with that, right? And the traumas that are transferred from generation to generation, which we know now, it has been scientifically proven. And so sometimes you don't have that depth, right? When you grow up and, you mature and then you get married and if you get married, have children, raise your children, have a roof over your head, put food on the table. As women, we know that we don't just work outside the home, we work in the home, right? So many jobs and I always used to say when I was raising my kids, we put ourselves last on the list because there is all these things that have to be done. And then, oops, if they don't get done because we want them done our way, let's face it, so it is, it's when the kids are grown up and you kind of, find a different rhythm to your life. Maybe we have that luxury. Now I am retired as of last year to kind of take that time but it's, I admire women and human beings in general who early in life can identify those triggers, right? And are able to navigate the churning water of life, whatever time in their life, at home, at work, whatever it is, raising the kids, dealing with PTAs or with teachers, whatever it is that you have to deal with. And it takes a lot of energy, right? And then, sometimes, and then another thing that I noticed, in times when I've been really reactive, I feel so terrible about myself afterward. And I feel so guilty because my reactivity is going to impact someone and is going to hurt someone unintentionally, right? And then you are like, oh my God. Then going to them and say, I am sorry. And then you can't, oftentimes it doesn't happen because you feel so terrible. How am I going to go to them and rehash that again? And then, so I just wanted to bring these things, and I don't know how you feel about that inherited reactivity that we get from cultural, religious, our parents' stories, centuries, or whatever. So I wanted to just mention that. Thank you for listening to me.
Oh, Martine, thank you so much. Such beautiful reflections and realizations. I was just really taking it in and appreciating them. This inherited reactivity, it's we didn't really go into that today, wanted to keep it a bit simple because now we're moving into something much more complex, and we start to see just like the gamut of what we're facing. We're trying I think many of us are at least curious about, or on the journey to really trying to discover our true selves, the essence, soul, the spirit within. And as we're trying to navigate that, we start to realize the complexity of what we've gotten ourselves into, really, being in this body mind organism that has, the mind, intelligence, and ego along with, and we're carrying all of that with us. And so when you were speaking about inherited reactivity, I was thinking about a conversation I was just recently having with a coaching client, because my coaching nowadays is really focused on really trying to unravel and work on this reactivity piece. And he is, originally was brought up in Japan, and it's only now, after becoming a parent, he's starting to recognize how the way in which his parents dealt with certain situations in terms of, for example, shutting down, is the way that he now is starting to do that, right? And so this inherited reactivity, I think, is another layer. It's a more subtle, nuanced layer. We first start off with like the basic needs, and then we have the needs around our own identity and our own ego. But then as we go deeper, and the Yoga Sutras speak about this, and I was speaking about, had a really lovely conversation with another member in the group I was in about the Yoga Sutras, about the vrittis. These are these impressions, right, that we're constantly taking in, and then those vrittis become samskaras, even more like lasting, deeper impressions, then that can be carried on from life to life, right? And then when we're finally able to kind of notice them and see them for what they are, we start to recognize and see, what is this? I can't really seem to find a place for this based on how I'm made up. Like, wow, this is coming. Okay, what do I do with it? And I think that is really where, within the Bhakti tradition, we hear of this place of, and the pastime of Krishna and Yashoda, of Yashoda wanting to ensure her beautiful Krishna grows up to be a good boy, and he's stealing butter. And then so she says, okay, this is too much. I mean, I need to just help you out here. And so she's running after him. And then, she's looking to tie him up, and gently, of course. And she's getting all the rope in the village, and it's always 2 fingers too short. And I think that pastime has so much to do with our own experience in facing and encountering these challenges and these unwanted things in the heart, right? That there is the need for our effort, right? And so when we're delving into these texts and learning more about our psychophysical organism, that trying to implement those teachings as best as possible, that is our effort, and that is so much needed. But at a certain point, we also recognize the limitation of our effort. There are certain things that, like this, what do I do with this? This is just so much bigger than I am. I'm not even conscious of it, and that is where we're really dependent on grace. Right. And so those two fingers are just so important, right? Like our effort and grace, it's the combination of the both. And if we only rely on one or the other, it doesn't, the power that is, or that potency that is possible to access, we don't actually ever tap into. So you're absolutely right. Yes, that there are all of these samskaras and inherited reactions that they come into this life with, but we can, in some ways, we work with what we can, and then the rest, we and that is too also an activity to pray very specifically. There is a Bhakti practitioner, his name is Vrndavan Prabhu, and Vrndavan Das, and he speaks about these unwanted things in the heart, right? So reactivity could be labeled as one of those things. In the Sanskrit are known as anarthas. And he says, we should target and mark specific anarthas for destruction. We should X them out, and we should mark them for destruction. And then our prayers become so much more personal. And we say, I'm so helpless. And it comes from feeling, because we actually experience our own helplessness. And it's when we when we're able to call out with feeling, even with one another, right? If we go to a friend or a loved one and we say, I am struggling, and you know, and as we're speaking, tears come to our eyes, or a swell of emotion wells up from within, then it's experience. That's like the other person's heart is touched, right? We've probably experienced it with others coming to us. And, you know, when we're able to do that and go in a place of like really needing help. So the same thing, you know, with Krishna, with the divine, that when we go in that mood, that is also an activity. That is also effort. Prayer is an effort, you know, and when we are able to pray in that way, then, you know, there's a way in which the gateway to grace becomes unblocked. Because that's another thing I've heard before, that grace and mercy is all around us. We just need to be on the lookout for it. But it's often when we're in a place of helplessness that it's easier to see it. If life is just kind of going about and we're like, yeah, everything's kind of okay, I'm all right. Yeah, there's things that are unwanted, but come on, everybody has unwanted things. It's okay. We won't be able to tap into it.
Thank you. Wow. It's an amazing share with an amazing follow-up. I just wanted to ask, Vrin, before we forget, because I have people private messaging me asking about how to contact you and for your coaching. Could you share really briefly the screen, the thing that you have with your contact information, just so that everybody can see that?
Yes. So 1 second here. You can please feel free to contact me. You can email me at Vrin, VRIN, @illuminate.nyc. And my Instagram handle is @illuminate.nyc. So if you want to take a picture, or if you want to write it down, please feel free.
Right. Yeah. So please take a screenshot and to follow up. Okay, great. So my co-host Surabhi Govinda Devi Dasi has her hand up if you want to go next, and then we'll probably be going into presentations.
Okay. Yes, a fabulous talk, Vrndavan. Thank you so much. It's such a needed in the society we live in today, given the age of distraction, right? So one of the things that I think we spoke about in the group was, you know, there's this idea that we have the stage 1 and stage 2 with the basic and the core needs not being satisfied, and we have reactions and emotions. Yeah, I think one of the things we talked about was this is an ongoing state of the human being. To err is human. This is where it is. This is what we do. And in some cases, we can self-manage to avoid, and other times it's going to happen, but not to worry about it happening, because it's how we recover and manage and build that capability to tolerate the next time, which is what the real learning is. So it's not trying to be good and avoid, and you know, because if we think like that, life gets really hard. So when we do this, it's that third stage is important. It's how do we recover? How can we manage this? And how can we grow stronger and help others to grow stronger from it? So I just wanted to point that out, because that's in thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it reminds me back to Martin's sharing, actually, of I was really struck by when you said, yeah, you know, we react, and then, you know, and it affects others, and we feel so guilty, you know, like the number of times a day I experience it, it's really unbelievable. And then you were saying also of trying to apologize, perhaps, and, you know, this is something I've struggled with a lot, the apology piece. You know, like, first of all, our egos don't like to apologize. Have you noticed that? Like, I struggle so much with apology. And then sometimes it feels like, well, you know, my apology won't even be accepted, or, you know, like all of these things kind of like, again, become justifications not to apologize. And, you know, one thing, you know, and Surabhi Govinda, as you were speaking, this was coming to mind. And as I mentioned at the beginning too, of trying to take responsibility is so necessary. You know, this is like an ongoing piece of work for myself, you know, trying to take responsibility. It's humiliating to take responsibility. That is what happens, right? It's humiliating for what, though? I think that's an important thing. It's humiliating for the ego. It's liberating for the soul, right? Because it creates a distance between the ego and the soul, because we think we are our egos, body, mind, ego. We think all of this, but actually the soul is actually like, I mean, we hear that the soul is full of eternity, knowledge, and bliss, and its inherent nature is to serve. And it's, in order to experience all of that, it requires humility. And so we hear also the saying that humiliation comes before humility, right? And so I think there's a way in which, and then we hear also within Bhakti that humility is a cornerstone or necessary quality in order to actually tap into this powerful sound vibration, which is what ultimately will really free us. And that is free us to actually recognize we're the soul, right? And then we hear like, yeah, that, one should be more humble than a blade of grass. And we hear of these things, but to actually be able to make the connections is so needed, right? And this is a place where we can try, and there are times where it might be too hard, but if we can, in whatever way, whether that is to apologize or, sometimes my experience is to just not be defensive when somebody says you're being reactive, and to just, you're right. You're right. Yeah, I'm helpless right now. I'm really sorry.
Thank you, Vrin. And thank you, Surabhi Govinda, for kind of broadening that. And there's more going on in the chat, but we are starting to get to the end of our time together, ladies. So I do apologize. However, as I've written in the chat, we do have our Urban Devi WhatsApp groups, where for those of you who haven't joined us yet, they are a great space. We have a discussion one as well as an announcement one, and I'll put the links in the chat again. You can join us and we can continue some of these conversations. Also, if you're looking for further support, Vrin still has her contact information up on the screen. You can follow up with her. And also just want to give a shout out to our dear Rukmini Walker. Even though she's not here, this is happening because of her. She has created this virtual space. She has inspired all of us. So I put some links in the chat. If you want to support what she's doing, if you want to join her email list, check out this recording will be available on her YouTube later today. Please check that out. This is a really great way to support this Sangha and just kind of continue this going. So please feel free to do that. And then also, I just want to ask everyone before I wrap us up with what we're going to be doing next month, is that I will be sharing your feedback with Vrin that you write in the chat. So if you have any positive feedback, please write it in the chat. I will be sharing with that later on with her. So if you feel shy, you can always private message me, and you could do that while I present about what next month is going to be. So
Damodar Priya, can I just say one thing?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I just looked in the chat and I saw some of the questions, and they're so genuine and such important questions. I'm so sorry we didn't have time to answer them, but if you would like to email me those questions, I would be so happy to just offer, some perspectives that might be, hopefully of service to you. So just want to acknowledge, so sorry that we weren't able to get to them.
It's okay. And that's actually a mark of a great presentation, is when we usually have more questions than we have time for. It's because everybody was so inspired that they have more that they want to go out. So yes, please reach out to Vrin. And I will also be sharing her contact information as well in the YouTube description and in our WhatsApp group, so you can reach out to her. But as I said, please feel free to share your feedback to her in the chat so that I can share that with her later, while I tell us about our next Urban Devi. So please put that on your calendars. Our next Urban Devi will be May 19th, and our speaker will be Nava Kishori Devi Dasi, and her topic will be finding strength in difficult relationships. I just love how Rukmini Walker just kind of, without even really meaning to, just the perfect segue from your talk, Vrin, into this talk. So just a brief description. She says, navigating tough relationships can be incredibly hard and painful, often causing individuals to lose themselves in the process. However, in finding strength in difficult relationships, we explore a way to reclaim stability and resilience, ensuring that despite the challenges, one can emerge stronger without sacrificing their true self. so well. Talk about also Krishna magic, because I feel like that talks about, kind of touches on a little bit of the questions that have come up in the chat as well. So thank you again, Vrndavan Vinodini Devi Dasi, so much for joining us. As I said, we have so many people kind of reaching out and saying this has been illuminating, this has been so helpful. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. We hope that you can join us again in May, and we appreciate you all so very much. Okay, Hare Krishna, bye.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.